Welcome on back, everybody, to the All Aussie Rules YouTube channel. As you can probably tell already, this is the Essendon Bombers comparison 2023 a 2024 episode. Are they really better than they were last year? We're going to delve into some of the stats, have a look at it. Up until this point last year, where they were fifth on the ladder, this year they're sitting fourth. Have they improved? We're going to find out. Maybe not concretely prove whether they have or not, but we'll have a look at the stats and see what we think after that. As always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. If you're a Bombers fan, let me know how confident are you with the rest of their season. And if you're not a Bombers fan, what do you think of the Bombers? Are they the real deal? Are they just pretenders? Obviously, we're going to find out a lot in the next 8 or so weeks. But let's jump straight into this video and we'll determine what we think while I get the first page up. Don't forget also to follow me on all my social medias. We've got Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, all of the above. And don't forget there's also 2 podcast episodes that come out every single week on Spotify and YouTube, Mondays and Fridays. So check them all out and let's jump straight into it. So first up, we have a look at where they were last year at this point after round 17 and where they are this year after round 17. Last year they sat 5th with 9 wins, 7 losses and a percentage of 107%. This year, they're 1 position better in 4th, 1 extra win to be on 10 wins, 5 losses and a draw. So 1.5 wins ahead of where they were last year. But their percentage has taken a little bit of a dip from this point, up until this point. Now we'll have a look at the scoring for and against first. Last year they averaged 88.69 points per game up until round 17. This year that's dropped by 4 points per game down to 84.69, so slightly less offensively. Of course, you've got to take into account maybe they blew a team out last year. That doesn't really matter. Maybe they didn't. Who knows? But overall, average-wise, they've dropped by 4 points per game offensively, while defensively, they've gone from conceding 82.81 points per game up to 84 points per game. So they also concede 1.19 more points per game than they did last year. That's not the be-all and end-all. Like, they've obviously won more games than they had up until this point last year. So there's positives, there's negatives. It's the way it's going to look. That's the way stats work. They're never concretely one way or the other. Well, they could be, but it's very unlikely. Total time in front is an interesting stat that I had a look at. As you can see, last year up until this point, they had spent 1,010 minutes and 0.78 of a second in front. Whereas this year, it's pretty much identical, but for about half a minute, basically. So last year, it was 63 minutes, 0.17 per match that they were leading. This year, just 2 seconds per match less than they did last year. So very, very tight in that regard. Not much different in that regard, really, if you look at it. Does that make much difference? Probably not. But it's not the be-all and end-all again. So we'll see what else we can find going through the stats. This is the quarter-by-quarter and half-by-half analysis. As you can see, first quarters are very similar. Both years, 8 and 7 in first quarters, only marginally positive on the point scoring front. Second quarters, once again, very similar, 7 and 8 both seasons, +1 last year in second quarters in points per quarter, whereas this year, -2. So nothing, certainly a drop-off in total points, but that's okay. Third quarter, last year they were 10 and 6. It was by far their best quarter, +6.38 points per quarter. This year it's probably their best quarter again, but they're only 8 and 8 with a positive 2.31 points per quarter. Fourth quarter, Last year 9-7, so good head-to-head record, but we're losing 1.81 points total per quarter. This year 7 wins, 7 losses, and 2 draws for just a slightly negative 0.56. So first half's basically identical in head-to-head record, 9-7 at halftime. Scoring slightly worse this year, a couple points per half. Second half last year, 10 wins, 5 losses, and a draw. This year 9-7, so not too dissimilar. Point scoring wise, once again, second halves last year were really good, plus 4.56. This year plus 1.75. So they do play better in second halves than first halves this year, but overall a drop off across kind of the board. Like first quarters are identical almost. Second quarters are similar. It's mainly that third quarter drop off where they were really, really good last year. This year, it's not quite to the same level. Now, looking at some of the other stats for the Bombers, disposal-wise, they overall total numbers has only gone up by about 1 disposal per match. So not a massive increase there, but they've restricted their opposition disposal counts quite a lot. So last year they were only plus 12.3. This year they're plus almost 28 disposals per game, which is quite a massive margin. As you can see, I also chucked in like their best performance and worst performance, so nothing too outrageous there. Last year their bad was in terms of disposal. Doesn't obviously mean whether you win the game or not, but the most they were smashed in disposals was a lot worse than what they have been by in any match this year. Like their worst this year is minus 28, which is pretty much breaking even, let's be honest. So head-to-head record, that's certainly out dominating their opponents in disposals more often this year. Kicks is very similar, slightly down on kicks compared to last year, whereas handballs slightly up, but once again, they have certainly increased their disposals compared to their opposition this year. Across the board, both kicks and handballs, an extra 10 kicks than their opponents this year than last year, and an extra 6 handballs per game than their opponents. Next up, inside 50s. This is probably the biggest change in the Bombers game. The territory battle, they certainly get the ball forward a lot more this year than they did last year. Hasn't equated to scoring, and we'll look at that in a minute with our forward efficiency and such. But just in pure numbers, inside 50s, last year they only won the inside 50 count 5 of the first 16 matches for a differential of minus 5.1 basically per game, whereas this year they're 11-5 and a positive of 5.6. So that's like an 11, or not quite, almost 11 inside 50 turnaround on last year. So defensively don't concede as many inside 50s, and also offensively they've gone up by 5. So quite a big change there. Both in their good games and bad games have improved. There's no doubt about that. They certainly win the territory battle a lot more than they did last year. Disposal efficiency isn't much different than last year. Slightly down, but certainly not anything to be concerned about either way. They're very similar overall. This is the first part that has changed a lot, is their forward efficiency. Last year they were, up until round 17, very, very effective going forward. They won the forward efficiency battle 11 out of the 16 times, with a forward efficiency of 51.37, which if they were doing that this year, they would be in the top 2 or 3 teams in the league in that rank, in that stat category. Whereas this year they're 6-10 and 45.45%, which is down 6% on last year. Both their best hasn't been as good as last year, and their worst has been worse than last year. So twofold there. Is it a concern? Not really, in terms of, because they have been dominating the territory battle. So I mean, the more times you go inside 50, it tends to be harder to continually score at that rate. It's going to be a concern in games where they don't dominate the territory battle, how they manage to score, because that is becoming a slight issue for them here and there. At the end of the day, though, it's not the worst thing. I know that against both Gold Coast and Carlton in their 2 losses recently, their forward efficiency wasn't great. So it's probably an area that maybe they need to find a better avenue to goal at times. But overall, not drastic thing to worry about, really, just because of the fact that they are dominating that territory battle. Defensive efficiency has also dropped. Last year they won it 11 times. This year only 6, and it's dropped from 46.63. So forward efficiency, you want a higher percentage. Defensive efficiency, you want a lower one. So 46.63 last year was really, really good. 48.88 is down towards the bottom of all teams this year. Their best performance is very similar to last year. It's just their worst performance defensively has been worse than what they managed at any time last year. So up until those last 7 rounds, we're completely ignoring those in all of these stats because they certainly fell off. Their last couple of weeks were atrocious. So yeah, forward and defensive efficiency has certainly dropped, but their territory battle has certainly improved. So that counteracts the fact a little bit. So they almost are scoring the same amount as last year, even though their forward efficiency has dropped quite a long way. Now we look at clearances and contested and uncontested footy. We'll start with clearances. Head to head, obviously last year they weren't outstanding. Overall minus 0.38 clearances per game, whereas this year they're 0.81 positive. Head-to-head record has improved. Last year it was 6 wins, 7 losses and 3 draws in that regard. This year it's 10 and 6. So certainly an improvement in overall clearances. That's just over 1 clearance per game better off than they were last year. Centre clearances also improved. Once again, just over 1 centre clearance per game improvement. Head-to-head record certainly improved as well. Stoppage clearances is basically the same, slight improvement, but not really much. So as you can see, stoppage clearances have stayed level, whereas their centre clearances have slightly improved on last year. Contested footy, last year they were 7 and 9 in the head-to-head record of contested footy, whereas this year they're 8 wins, 6 losses and 2 draws. That suggests that they're certainly improved in the head-to-head record. Overall contested possessions has dropped by 2.5 per game, but the differential compared to their opposition has also improved quite a lot. That's 3.5 roughly possessions per game. So that's quite a big improvement year on year. It also suggests that their games have become more uncontested than they were last year, just due to the fact that their contested possessions, while decreasing, has also improved in their head-to-head record and their differential. Uncontested footy, obviously this is an area where they play probably their best. Last year they were 10 and 6, this year 12 and 4, slightly up 1.5 uncontested possessions a game. Differential up 6.5 possessions per game, so quite a big leap there. Obviously they have a very high ceiling in terms of uncontested footy, week in, week out. There's no doubt about that. They are very good in that regard. We've got one more slide here, and this one is starting with turnover game. Last year they won the turnover game 7. This is turnover / intercepts. So looking basically, you want the lowest number in total is better. So they have improved by pretty much exactly 2 turnovers less per game than they did last year, for a benefit of 3 basically, just over 3 compared to their opposition per game. So that is a big turnaround as well, which leads them to their domination in field position compared to last year. Turnover game is a massive part of that, especially in AFL this year. Chuck that in with their slight improvement in clearances. That is why they're getting so much ground domination, because they are getting the clearances better than last year, and they're also turning it over, causing intercepts better than they did last year. The mark game slightly down on last year. Their peak is as good as it was last year, but overall slightly down on total numbers and obviously, but their differential is higher, so they're not conceding as many marks as they were last year. Tackle game last year they were 13 and 3. They were really good. This year they're probably better in my eyes, but 10 and 6, so slightly worse on the head-to-head record. But they are a top 3 tackling team in terms of differential. They've gone up almost 5 tackles per game for a slight edge in differential. And tackles inside 50 has also improved. Last year they averaged 10.88 per game. This year it's 11.31. So slight improvement across the board in that regard. That is everything for the Bombers, stats-wise. We'll now just have a look at what happened to them last year at the end of the year and what they've got to come this year. Obviously, everybody knows they were sitting 5th on the ladder after round 17 last year. Things fell apart. They lost their next 3 games from this point. They then won 2 games, which were against the bottom 2 teams, North Melbourne and West Coast. Very tightly won those ones. And then they finished with 2 blowouts, losses against GWS and Collingwood, who understandably were in the end preliminary final teams. One of them won the premiership and the other one just missed out in a prelim. So not against bad teams did they get flogged in those 2, but their season certainly fell apart. Obviously only ended the season with 11 wins when they were 9 wins from their first 16. So not a good finish last year. They have excuses. They did have injuries. But they just had a massive drop-off in the end. That's all it comes down to. This year, will the same happen? You'd have to say no. If we get up their remaining fixtures, this is what they've got left coming up. I personally think they should win at least 5 of these. If they are truly going to be contenders this year, they have to win 5 of these. There's no doubt about that. So this week they play Melbourne at the MCG. Big game for them. Melbourne have been a little bit better the last couple of weeks. Bombers a chance to really cement themselves in that top 4. Then they follow that up with Adelaide at the Marvel Stadium. Another game that they should win. They beat Adelaide over in Adelaide earlier this year, so there's no reason why you would think they should lose there. They then play Marvel Stadium against St Kilda. Another game they should win. St Kilda obviously coming off their win against Sydney. If they can get some more form into them, you never know. They do tend to get up for the big games at the moment, St Kilda. They just kind of struggle to win the games that they should. They then have Fremantle at the MCG, which typically you'd say should be an easy win. Fremantle have been okay in Melbourne this year, so I wouldn't put it down as a guaranteed win, but I would say they should be winning that one. They then have Gold Coast at Marvel Stadium, which you'd have to put down as a win. At this point, as of time of recording, Gold Coast haven't won an away game yet this year, and you would think it would be very difficult to their first one to be at Marvel Stadium against the Bombers. They've already had a couple cracks at Marvel this year, against North Melbourne last week and St Kilda, and they missed out on both of them. Granted, they probably had enough chances in both of those to win the games, but they just couldn't do it. And then the last 2 weeks is where it gets a little bit interesting for the Bombers. Sydney at Marvel Stadium will be an interesting game. Sydney possibly, depending on what they do for the next few weeks. Obviously, they've lost their last couple, but they could already have top spots sealed by this point, so who knows. They'll certainly have top 2 sealed by this point, you would imagine. So Essendon will be playing for maybe a lot more than them, still fighting for a top 4 spot, you'd imagine. And then they finish up going to the Gabba for the Brisbane Lions, which will be a really tough finish. Both teams potentially in that fight for top 4. Will be very interesting to see how that one goes. But the Bombers could be in huge form. They should win their next 5. If they then knock off Sydney in Melbourne, They could be 6 in a row, well, 7 in a row with the Collingwood win last week, and absolutely flying. So, big run home for the Bombers. You'd have to say it's hard to see them dropping off like they did last year. They certainly don't have the toughest run home in the AFL. In fact, they've probably got one of the easiest, if we're being honest. And it's hard to see a world where they don't finish definitely in the top 8, but they should be fighting for a top 4 spot if they don't have a drop off like they did last year. Final thoughts. My final thoughts. I can't say the word. Anyway, my final thoughts are they have improved overall. I think the main area of concern for them is their forward efficiency and also their defensive efficiency. Going forward, I think they just need to find some better options and get more consistent with that. Yeah, some of their entries inside 50 aren't always great, but that goes along with having a better performing forward line. And defensively, sometimes they get beaten over the back, and that's obviously always a concern for most teams these days. But yeah, something they just might need to tidy up a little bit to really be contenders, I think. I don't see them contending for a premiership this year, but a lot of things can happen between right now and the end of the year. A couple injuries to them or to other teams, and all of a sudden it changes the whole dynamic of the league. So yeah, that's everything I have to say. Video went slightly longer than I planned. We're at about 22 minutes. But thanks for tuning in. Let me know in the comments what you think of the Bombers. Plenty more content coming out on YouTube over the coming weeks. So keep checking back. Make sure you're subscribed. Hit that notification bell. And I'll catch you on the next one.